Vindam unto Krishna, the giver of pleasure to the senses. Uktva, saying, Tushnim, silent. Babhuva, became. Ha, certainly. Translation and purport by Srila Prabhupada. Sanjaya said, having thus spoken, Arjuna, the chastiser of enemies, told Krishna, Govinda, I shall not fight, and fell silent. Purport, Dhritarashtra must have been very glad to understand that Arjuna was not going to fight and was instead leaving the battlefield for the begging profession. But Sanjaya disappointed him again, relating that Arjuna was competent to kill his enemies, Parantapaha. Although Arjuna was, for the time being, overwhelmed with false grief due to family affection, he surrendered unto Krishna, the supreme spiritual master, as a disciple. This indicated that he would soon be free from the false lamentation resulting from family affection and would be enlightened with perfect knowledge of self-realization or Krishna consciousness, and would then surely fight. Thus, Dhritarashtra's joy would be frustrated since Arjuna would be enlightened by Krishna and would fight to the end. Om Agyanatimirandasya Ginanjana Shalakya Chakshur Unmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namah Shri Chaitanya Mano Bhishtam Stapitam Nina Bhutali Swayam Rupakata Mahyam Dadati Swapatantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Tapatakamanam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sakana Ragadantam Vitam Tam Shijivam Sadvitam Savadutam Prijana Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sagana Lalita Shivashakan Vitamscha Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dina Bandhu Jagat Pate Gopisha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchara Gaurangi Radhi Vrindavaneshware Vrishapanu Sute Devi Pranama Hare Priye Vanchaka Patubhyashtra Kripa Sindhu Bhivacha Patita Nam Pavne Bhyo Vaishnavi Bhyo Namo Namaha Namo Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prishtaya Putale Shrimati Bhakti Vikasa Swamin Iti Namane Namo Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prishtaya Putale Shrimati Bhakti Vinanta Swamin Iti Namane Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Prasharne Nirvishesha Shunivari Paschatya Dishitarne. So here, forgive me, I'm just looking for one verse. Let's see if it's in this volume or not. Okay, different volume. Okay, so Arjuna here in this verse, well, actually this section of the Bhagavad Gita is quite important. There's a few famous verses that come around here. Just what's spoken recently was this verse, Karpanya doshapata svabhava, ending with shishasteham sharimam tvam prapanam, that Arjuna surrendered unto Krishna as a disciple. And then at least this, I've heard this quoted a lot, na yotsaita govinda, O Govinda, I shall not fight. And then after this, 2 verses after this comes the famous Ashocham Anvashochas Tvam Pragya Vadam Shabashu. So you're speaking learned words, and then obviously the Inosmini Tagde here, as well as other important verses in the 2nd chapter. So actually this is where, not quite, but it's coming in verse 11, this is where the Bhagavad Gita actually begins. Previously, there's lead up, there's the setting the scene in the 1st chapter, giving like background and the talks between Duryodhana and Dhritarashtra, etc., like this, discussing what happened on the battlefield of Kurukshetra. And then Arjuna, Krishna has spoken, but he hasn't, like, the instructions unto Arjuna haven't officially started. But Arjuna has surrendered at this point. And interestingly, his first activity after surrendering is to tell Krishna what to do. He's surrendered unto Krishna, saying that I am your disciple, please instruct me as you wish. And then he's telling Krishna, I'm not going to fight. So it's interesting, it's almost contradictory. Sometimes the Krishna consciousness is like that too, that although we try to surrender, our mind tells us something else, and we just act against whatever sort of, whether it be a spiritual authority in terms of leadership, or whether it be in terms of a spiritual master, whatever may be requested of us. We're trying to surrender, but due to some sort of attachment, some sort of material attachment, we're not able to do so. So specifically here, Srila Prabhupada brings out in the purport, so although Arjuna was for the time being overwhelmed with false grief due to family affection, he surrendered unto Krishna, the supreme spiritual master, as a disciple. So Arjuna, his fall was that he's being bewildered by familial affection. He's thinking that these men and all these men and relatives gathered on the battlefield are his kinsmen like this, and has already been described and talked about, and he's feeling compassion for them. False compassion based upon bodily relationships. So, and amongst other things as well. But Arjuna's saving grace, so to speak, was the fact that, as Srila Prabhupada points out here, he surrendered unto Krishna as a disciple. And that this surrender, it indicated that he would soon be free from the false lamentation resulting from family affection. So although Arjuna is currently still apparently bewildered by the waves of material nature, his enlightenment is almost as if guaranteed. Srila Prabhupada is making the point here. It's only a question, it's only a separation of time. So similarly, when we take up Krishna consciousness, our liberation and our enlightenment is also too guaranteed. Srila Prabhupada, in the first canto 9th chapter, he writes that, to paraphrase him, when one starts the process of devotional service, it's almost as if one lights fire to a line of gunpowder. Once it's been lit, it cannot be checked by any means. So similarly, in devotional service, once we start the process, our eventual enlightenment is guaranteed, even if there's some sort of, even if there's a fall down on our part by whatever means. Krishna says this in the Bhagavad Gita, and actually the same thing is confirmed in the Bhagavatam, where the demigods, they say that the impersonalists, they fall, although impersonalists, by dint of their own elevation, they may be so learned, and they still, yet they fall down. So the impersonalists, despite their elevation, even to the platform of liberation, they're still prone to fall back into material nature and lose practically all the progress they've made, as is described elsewhere in the Bhagavatam. The impersonalists, due to their, Mayavadi Krishna Aparadi, they're offenders unto Krishna. So, but as well, they desire this state of just Kaivalya, oneness, complete inertia like this. And so they take birth as trees and rocks and like this, and turn into forms like this when they return back to the material world. Yet, the devotees, on the other hand, it's tata niti madhavatavaka kvajit brashanti marga dvaipada suridaha dvayapi gupta vichanati nirpaya vinayaka nipa Vinayaka Mordaso Prabhu. Even though a devotee may be traversing on the path of devotional service and somehow he falls down, still he's not bereft of all his advancement in devotional service. He's still progressive, he still traverses over material existence with ease, because Krishna still protects him, and he easily passes over the heads of his opponents, it says there. So the point is, so extrapolating from this point Srila Prabhupada is making here, the same thing applies to us. So when we try to surrender unto Krishna, Krishna sees that and he reciprocates with that. What is it? What is that? Sri Nanda Kumar, do you know how that starts? The first line of that. Sharanga Sharanagati, Hoibi Jahar, Tahar Prarthana Shune, Sri Nanda Kumar. So when we adopt this six-limbed process of Sharanagati, of trying to surrender unto Krishna, which is what has been being mentioned here, when we strive to surrender unto Krishna, the result, even if imperfectly done, the result is that Prarthana, what is that? How does it start? Prarthana, Sharanga Sharanakati, Hoibi Jahar, Tahar Prarthana Shune, Sri Nanda Kumar. So Sri Nanda Kumar hears our prarthana, hears our prayers. And he certainly reciprocates with those. And I mean, it's a practical thing. As we see, Arjuna is striving Arjuna has surrendered, technically. Still, he possesses some sort of dosha, some sort of fault that Krishna detects, and still he's expressing this in front of Krishna. He's telling Krishna that he's not going to fight, despite the fact he's surrendered. So, in a way, you could take it as an anartha that Arjuna is exhibiting here directly. Still, Krishna, in spite of this almost command, or that Arjuna is giving Krishna here, strangely enough, this Nayotsa iti govindam, still Krishna he still nevertheless accepts Arjuna's sentiment or his feeling and instructs him appropriately. Actually using very strong words here with this ashuchan of ashuchavstvam. You're speaking learning words, but you're mourning for that which is not worthy of grief, etc. like this. So, continuing here, So yeah, Srila Prabhupada skipped over this point, but this point is mentioned Parantapaha. Srila Prabhupada is just bringing up some subtle points in the Bhagavad Gita that Dhritarashtra must have been very glad to see that Arjuna was going to leave the battlefield. But Sanjaya, he subtly hinted that Arjuna, he wasn't actually going to leave by using this word, Parantapaha. Arjuna was competent to kill his enemy. And so Srila Prabhupada says, thus Dhritarashtra's joy would have been frustrated. It says Arjuna would have been enlightened by Krishna directly and would fight to the end. So, I'm just scanning through the purport and seeing any points I may have missed here. So yeah, this indicated that he would soon be free from the false limitation resulting from family affection and would be perfectly enlightened. So I want to move on to verse 10 here because I still have time, but I'll open it up for any comments or questions anybody might have on this verse. Otherwise, we can move on. Yeah, Rob, you have something?
Yes. In sixth canto, chapter 15, text 2,
Mm-hmm.
instructed, it says, okay, what relationship does the body with you, the men, have with you, and what relationship do you have with him? You may say that you are now related as father or son and son. Or what do you think this relationship exists before? Does it truly exist now? And will it continue in the future? The instruction given by Narda and Miriam are the true spiritual instruction for the region relationship. This world is temporary, but because of our previous karma, we are here to accept bodies created by temporary relationships in terms of society, friendship, love, nation, community, which are full, which are all finished at that time. These temporary relationships did not exist in the past, nor will they exist in the future. Therefore, at the present moment, the so-called relationships are with this Arjuna is lamenting. About, you remember that past time where the king's son died, how he was lamenting. So, he's lamenting for his relative. Because
Yeah, it's the force of these bodily relationships. Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he has one bhajan, sings Nanaka Janani Sneheti Gurya, uh, Samsara Lagi Lopalo. So basically, I believe I'm skipping a line here, but by Janaka Janani Sneheti, the affection of his the affection of his mother and father by this material relationship is he's been become bewildered. And the result is he's forgotten the lotus feet. And he's thinking some sort of laki lopalo. That material existence is he's thinking it to be very nice because of these bewildering bodily relationships. But he's as Srila Prabhupada, he himself writes in one bhajan, I was just here recently. He writes in this Vrindavan Bhajan, I think it's called, that he's sitting alone in Vrindavan and all of his family members, where are they now? They've all abandoned him. And what's all that's left is simply a list of names. So these family relationships, they just keep the conditioned soul material existence deeper and deeper. And they strive to cover his real identity. I mean, it's just one of the things, family affection,
It's
it's
one
one
of
of
the
the
multifold
multifold
limbs
limbs
of
of
false
false ego. But it's definitely a great impediment. We see that in the case of Arjuna here. So, is there anything, other points on this verse? Otherwise, I want to move on to 10. Yes.
Question. So you were talking about how I don't have the translation, but Arjuna more or less was like saying, the previous verse Arjuna said, I surrender, I need you, Krishna.
Yeah.
You tell me whatever you want to do. And then Arjuna's, he doesn't want to fight.
Yeah.
That's mentioned in this verse. And then you talked about how some anyways, but just to bring up that question, but just like sometimes like in Krishna consciousness, like we surrender to somebody or like we go or we have instructions, we're praying to Krishna and we're asking for help or guidance or whatever, but then we like receive that instruction, but then it's just like we like fail to act on it or like fail to like recognize that we're receiving help, whatever. So could you like express like what is like going on there? It's like we're surrendering, we want help, and we're like stuck, but at the same time, it's like we're receiving and getting help,
Yeah.
but then it's
It's a common thing actually. That specific situation, and maybe that specific situation may not come up so much because, but in general, it's a very common thing. I mean, in general, just basically speaking, we're not purified enough. And it's a case of a lack of advancement in Christian consciousness. Everybody wants to be a pure devotee, but it's hard. We're all striving for that, but when it comes time to execute pure devotional service, it can be hard. Oh, just like this, we may like you're giving an example. We may pray to Krishna for like to give us, praying for some like pure devotional service. Oh, praying for some sort just of like this. We may like you're giving an example. We may pray. The spiritual master gives like a very hard order. So it's like at that time, you gotta just like this word and how many may like you're giving an example. It comes spiritual master gives like a very hard order. So it's like at that time, you gotta just like this word and how many may like you're giving an example. It comes spiritual master gives like a very hard order. So it's like at that time, you just like this word and how many may like you're giving an example. It comes spiritual master gives like a very hard order. So it's like at that time, you just like this word and how many may like you're giving an example. It comes spiritual master gives like a very hard order. So it's like at that time, you just like this word and how many may like you're giving an example. It comes spiritual master gives like a very hard order. So it's like at that time, you just like this word and how many may like doing it is very difficult. I mean, even Srila Prabhupada, when he came to the West, he tells that in New York he was thinking of going back because he'll go to the ferryman and ask for the price of tickets. So, as well as in our own lives, we see it. I mean, there's so many things, whether it be the actual order of the spiritual master himself, operating within a devotional society, um, maintaining one's own ashram, living within the Grihastha ashram, living within the Brahmacharya ashram. So many difficulties are there, and it's a very hard thing to do practically. So it arises in so many situations. But the result and the solution of it is just surrendering to the best of our ability and going on in Krishna consciousness. Just like we see that, I mean, Srila Prabhupada, if we by a very objective analyzation of Srila Prabhupada's teachings, he makes the point that if one goes throughout life and remains celibate, he saves a great deal of time, right? So why doesn't everybody just remain celibate their whole life? It's the fact that not everybody can remain celibate their whole life. It's like a concession. It's a reality of the material world. So similarly, too, we're striving for pure devotional service, but the reality is that we're conditioned souls. So we have to deal with our anarthas in a gradual process. Like that. Okay? Okay. Yes.
I have a question in that regard. It's like, when even outside of like the emotional community, like people always want to be success. Right? They always want to try and give some advice. You know, people like that to be success. So in that regard, it's like when we're in the process of trying to surrender to the best of our ability and we're getting, advice from even sometimes unwarranted, advice from multiple sources within the emotional community. It's like, how is it that we like decipher like who it is that we take our advice from? Like, of course, through Sun and Fasha, but then it's like when you have so many devotees that want to give you advice, but you don't particularly per se like their advice. We're told that like when you have a guru, you should be someone that you want to take advice from, someone that you really listen to. And if people are giving advice and you're not really so inclined towards their advice, is that just like not wanting to surrender? Is that also really just like that's not
No, I see your point. Who to take advice from is though basically does I submit mission to senior. I mean to put your question into another form is also submission to seniors and submission to others, a sign of surrender. Yes and no, it really depends, and it comes down to an individual basis. I mean, like you're saying, a lot of people, even with devotional society, has a tendency of the conditioned soul to think himself always right. And so like you say, when you go in book distribution, you see people think they're right no matter whatever they do, and people will offer you advice on book distribution, even though they're completely illusion as to who they are, etc., like this. So anyway, back to your core question. So taking advice, who to take advice from, you have to see, practically speaking, and that's well, it's just a very practical thing in that, just like Srila Prabhupada, you may take advice even from those who aren't necessarily practicing devotional service if it comes down to practicalities. Just like Srila Prabhupada, he was advised by one librarian, I think it was, that he should instead print books and not print magazines because books will last, whereas people will just throw magazines away. And similarly, too, he was advised by some Jewish doctor in New York that he should walk every day, and consequently, he started taking more because both the librarian, he was making a good point, and the doctor, he was also making a good point. They're capable in their own material roles, so that's there when it comes to practicality. Now, spiritual advice. And I mean, just to extend that point, it may be that somebody may be very elevated spiritually or very advanced in terms of Krishna consciousness, but their advice on a particular material subject matter or area of service may not be so astute. In other words, if somebody may have been practicing devotional service for 40 years, but if they don't know how to cook, you don't want to take advice on how to cook from them. Now, when it comes to spiritual advice, it comes down to more of an individual basis, or not individual basis, but individual case. Generally, a general principle of Vaishnava etiquette is that we respect seniors, even if we don't necessarily accept their advice. Ultimately, we view things, we try to associate with like-minded devotees, and we understanding things in the correct light. And just like sometimes you see, before I even get to that, it's understanding the, not to stereotype the phrase, but the mood and mission of Srila Prabhupada and one's own spiritual master's approach towards Srila Prabhupada's teachings, like that. And there may be differences among spiritual masters. So one spiritual master may have a particular focus and another spiritual master may have a particular focus, but that doesn't mean they're wrong. So similarly too, one devotee, sometimes you'll find a devotee, they may be offering some advice such as, I don't know, there's so many things that could go on. They may advise you that, you should really ramp up prasadam distribution, and they may give you a whole bunch of quotes on how prasadam, Srila Prabhupada says so much that prasadam distribution, the movement can't go on without it, and it's the most important program in the movement. Now that's true, but when it comes to a practicality too, in that you have to see your own situation, you have to see how your own temple is running, you have to take it in line with the other teachings of Srila Prabhupada and like that. And two, as well, it's generally, from my knowledge, is that when taking spiritual advice and taking specifically shiksha from shiksha in not a less like formal way, and just in the sense that for a senior devotee's advices, and we take that as shiksha. So it's generally what I've seen is that devotees, they have a particular person they entrust and they take their guidance from. It's not they just haphazardly take guidance from here, there, and everywhere. Although it's not that we should disregard if some senior devotee is making a good point. Just like for instance, I just recently saw one devotee. He mentioned to me something about. I mean, he was basically mentioned. He was attempting to. I don't want to get so much into the specifics, but he was attempting to sort of downplay, is a more senior devotee, but there was a downplaying of what I perceived as Sahajiavad. So I wasn't necessarily so critical of him. I didn't say, you're wrong. I just didn't necessarily, just because one is senior, it doesn't mean you're obligated to accept their views. So similarly, extending to that doesn't, just because you don't accept the views of a senior devotee, that doesn't mean you're not surrendered. Now, when it comes to your own spiritual master, that's a different thing. The spiritual master, in a sense, although it should be done with intelligence, in a sense you could say it should be followed blindly. Not in a sense, it should be done with the intelligence. You should know why, but it's not that the disciple should have a view differing from the spiritual master necessarily, grossly differing, in other words. So it's a very specific question, and it could be answered in a very broad ways, but in general, I mean, it's not necessarily always that submission unto others onto whether it be god brothers, god sisters, or even local authorities necessarily constitute surrender. It can be, and Srila Prabhupada was very pleased by that. He ran a society with the expectation that his disciples would cooperate with one another and accept their own authority, and he stressed that, and he emphasized that. At the same time, he recognized disputes among his disciples as well. So I don't want to speak so much on that. It's very broad, but hopefully that's a good synopsis and gives you a good understanding. So, okay, so I wanted to do, but I only have 10 minutes. I think 11 comes Ashocham Anvashoshtvam, this verse, so it's very important. I guess I'll just leave it up for any more comments anybody may have, otherwise we can end early. Yes?
Based on the last question you had, what do you understand is better? In the sense like, should we take into account how that individual is standing, individual consciousness is? Should we take any of these things into account based on what it is that is taking advice, especially depending on what advice is? Should we look at, should this be any play? When we're taking that advice, depending on how they practice, what it is that they do, how they follow, trust.
Yeah. It's a very key element, actually. That's a very key element in the sense that, I mean, obviously you don't want to be taking spiritual advice from somebody who is deviated from the correct philosophical understanding as given by Srila Prabhupada and the previous acharyas. You don't want to follow the advice of somebody, spiritual advice of somebody who's not chanting 16 rounds, who's not eating only Krishna prasadam, etc. like this. Spelling doom for you. You may accept their material advice, just like somebody may be very good at money. They may not be following Krishna consciousness, but you may accept like that. Or they may be a very good cook. They may have been a cook in Krishna consciousness for so many years. They may have been a temple president for so many years, and you can accept their advice on that, even though they may not be following so strictly now. That's okay, because they have it. You're taking and you're relating it, you're able to fit it into your own service. But as far as spiritual advice, that's a little bit different. And sometimes the line can be blurred. That's why we always consult those when we make, especially when we make in terms of taking advice, usually you take advice to rectify a decision or make a decision, and usually decisions are made in consultation with not just one person, but multiple people as well. Sometimes one person, but especially major decisions are mentioned that I've heard of Vishnu Chitta Prabhu has told me before that you should at least approach 3 brahmanas and get a confirmation. He's told me that. And as well, it's a generally good thing to do to approach different god brothers and get different understandings. Because or seniors as well, not just god brothers, but because different people may have different views and can offer different understandings, different pros and cons like that. And one other final point I want to make on the same topic is that this is what I've heard before from senior devotees addressing a very similar question, is that, or that can get sort of controversial, so I don't want to touch there. But basically, well, I'll tell you what, Srila Prabhupada told this to Hansadutta Prabhu. He was having issues with his god brothers cooperating with him. Now, I don't know exactly the situation of that. But Srila Prabhupada, he told Hansadutta Prabhu that what is the issue? Your relationship was with the spiritual master, not necessarily with them. He told him that. Now, at the same time, so that understanding is there, but at the same time, it doesn't mean that our only obligation is to our guru. We should only, because that's the symptom of a Kanishta Adhikari. So there's a balance and there's a correct understanding there. And the line can be kind of thin, just as I said, in the similar way. But you could take it as both sides. It really depends on the situation and the circumstance that's being approached. So, okay. All right. We can end there. Srimad Bhagavad. So the next verse will be text 10, chapter 2. Srimad Bhagavad Gita ki. Srila Prabhupada ki.